She was standing in the middle of a room that had once felt like home. Her coat was already on, her bag was already packed, and the man she had given 3 years of her life to stood across from her like a stranger wearing a familiar face. He didn't shout. That was the part that broke her most. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't pace the floor. He simply stood there, still, cold, and certain, and looked at her the way you look at something you once trusted before it betrayed you. "I want you out," he said, "tonight." And from the top of the staircase, half hidden behind the wooden banister, a small pair of eyes watched in silence. 7 years old, bare feet on cold marble, a stuffed rabbit pressed tightly to her chest. She had heard everything, and she knew something her father did not. She knew the truth, but nobody had thought to ask her. Nobody ever thinks to ask the child. Raymond Holt had not always been the kind of man who trusted easily. He had built his empire, a sprawling network of tech infrastructure companies worth a reported $4.2 billion, on one principle above everything else: verify before you believe. It had served him well in boardrooms across London, Singapore, and New York. It had served him poorly in his marriage. His wife, Sabrina, had left 3 years ago, not loudly, not dramatically. She had simply placed her wedding ring on the kitchen counter one Tuesday morning, kissed their daughter Iris on the forehead, and walked out of the door with 2 suitcases and the kind of calm that told Raymond she had been preparing for months. He hadn't seen it coming. And that, perhaps more than the abandonment itself, was the thing that haunted him. He was a man who prided himself on reading people, on seeing things others missed, on knowing always who was loyal and who was not. And his own wife had deceived him for months without him noticing a single sign. After Sabrina left, Raymond had thrown himself back into work with the kind of intensity that other men reserve for grief. He worked 16-hour days. He traveled constantly. He closed deals in time zones that made sleep a luxury he rarely afforded himself. And Iris, small, sensitive, impossibly perceptive little Iris, was left in the care of nannies. 3 of them in the first year alone. The first left after 2 months, citing the cold environment of the household. The second was dismissed after Raymond discovered she had been sharing photographs of Iris on her private social media. The third simply stopped showing up one morning without explanation. Raymond was beginning to believe that trustworthy people did not exist. And then Celeste Brown walked through his front door. She had been recommended by his household manager, a no-nonsense woman named Patricia who had worked for Raymond for 6 years and had never once steered him wrong. "I've vetted her thoroughly," Patricia had said. "Her references are immaculate. She has 8 years of experience with high-profile families, and she is, in my professional opinion, the real thing." Raymond had sat across from Celeste in his home office for 45 minutes. She was 34, calm without being passive, direct without being aggressive. She looked him in the eye when she spoke, which he respected, and she answered every question without embellishment, which he respected even more. He asked her what she believed a child needed most. She said consistency, a voice, and at least one person in the world who always shows up. He hired her before she reached the door. In the weeks that followed, something quietly remarkable happened. Iris, who had barely spoken above a whisper since her mother left, began to laugh again. It was Celeste who noticed that Iris liked to draw intricate maps of imaginary places. It was Celeste who bought her a proper cartographer's sketchbook and sat beside her for hours while she filled it with mountains, rivers, and cities that only existed in her extraordinary little mind. It was Celeste who learned that Iris had nightmares about storms, and so she taught her a breathing technique: 4 counts in, 4 counts hold, 4 counts out, and whispered it to her during the night whenever thunder rolled across the sky. It was Celeste who, without ever overstepping, slowly became the most stable presence in a little girl's world that had been cracked open by abandonment. Raymond noticed. He did not say much about it. He was not a man who said much about anything that moved him emotionally, but he noticed the drawings on the refrigerator. He noticed that Iris now ran to the kitchen in the mornings instead of lying in bed until she was called. He noticed that his daughter, his quiet, wounded daughter, was slowly, carefully, beginning to trust again. And without entirely meaning to, so was he. Not romantically. That is important to understand. Raymond did not blur those lines, but there is a kind of trust that exists between two people who both love the same child deeply, and that trust had grown quietly between Raymond and Celeste over nearly 3 years. He trusted her with the alarm codes. He trusted her with Iris's medical history. He trusted her with the details of his schedule when it affected the household. And perhaps most significantly, he had recently trusted her with access to the household management tablet, a sleek device that sat on the kitchen counter and contained, among other domestic things, a shared drive connected to his personal cloud system. He had given her the access to manage school schedules, household supplier contacts, and appointment calendars. It had seemed at the time like a reasonable thing to do. Raymond's life changed, or rather, began to unravel on the Thursday evening of the 14th of March. He had been working for 18 months on the most significant deal of his career, a merger between his primary infrastructure company, Holt Systems, and a German-based tech firm called Voss Digital, a deal that, if completed, would make Raymond one of the most powerful figures in European technology. The negotiation had been delicate, slow-moving. There were 17 points of contention that had taken 14 months to resolve. Raymond's legal and strategy teams had spent those months developing a highly confidential counterproposal, a document that outlined in precise detail exactly how far Raymond was willing to move on price, equity split, intellectual property rights, and board composition. This document, internally codenamed the Meridian File, was known to fewer than 6 people on Earth. It lived on Raymond's private encrypted drive. On the evening of the 14th of March, a copy of the Meridian File was sent to the chief executive of Voss Digital's primary competitor, a man named Gerald Schaff, whose company had been trying to acquire Voss Digital themselves and had been outbid. They believed by Raymond. By morning, Gerald Schaff had used the document to restructure his own offer. By midday, the Voss Digital deal, 18 months of work, hundreds of millions in projected value, was on the verge of collapse. By 3 in the afternoon, Raymond's forensic IT consultant had traced the source of the leak. It had originated from the household management tablet, the one on the kitchen counter, the one Celeste used every day. Raymond did not sleep that night. He sat in his home office and stared at the forensic report until the numbers blurred. The timestamp showed the file had been accessed at 11:47 p.m., long after Celeste had finished her shift, yes, but she lived in the staff apartment attached to the property and had keypad access to the main house. The access had been made using her login credentials. The file had been forwarded from an encrypted temporary email account created on the same tablet. Raymond's legal team told him the evidence was, in their words, damning. His instinct, that complicated, wounded instinct that had failed him so catastrophically with Sabrina, told him to wait, to look deeper, to ask questions before drawing conclusions. But his lawyer, a precise and persuasive man named Howard Webb, sat across from him and said something that Raymond could not unhear. "Raymond, I know this is painful, but you told me yourself she had access to everything. She knew the drive existed. She had the login. The timestamp puts it at almost midnight. Who else could it have been?" Raymond looked at the report again. He thought about Sabrina walking out with 2 suitcases. He thought about how certain he had been that she would never betray him. He thought about how badly trust had cost him before. And something inside him, something that should have asked more questions, went very, very quiet. There was one other person in Raymond's life who had been watching the situation closely. Her name was Portia Sinclair. She was 39, elegant, composed, and magnetic in the particular way of people who have spent years studying how to appear trustworthy. She had entered Raymond's life 8 months ago through a charity gala, a mutual acquaintance, a brief conversation, a business card exchanged, and had since positioned herself with impressive patience at the edge of his inner circle. She was not yet his girlfriend. Raymond was cautious about such things, but she was close enough to be present at private dinners, close enough to know the layout of the house, close enough to have been in the kitchen on more than one occasion when Celeste was not watching. Close enough, as it happened, to know exactly where the household tablet sat every night. But nobody was thinking about Portia, because the forensic report had Celeste's name on it. And Raymond had stopped asking questions. Before we go any further into this story, I want to take just a moment to welcome you, warmly and sincerely, to Nanny Grace channel. This is a space created for those who understand that the most powerful stories are the ones lived behind closed doors. Stories layered with betrayal, trust shattered by silence, and innocence caught in the crossfire of adult decisions. If this is your first time here, welcome home. You found exactly where you belong. And if you've been here before, thank you. Your presence here means more than you know. Every story on this channel is told with one purpose: to make you feel seen, understood, and never alone in what you've experienced. If this story has already stirred something inside you, please consider subscribing to Nanny Grace channel, so that every new story finds its way to you. Now, let's go back, because the most devastating part of this story hasn't happened yet. The morning Celeste was called into Raymond's office, she came in wearing her work clothes. She had no idea what was coming. She thought perhaps it was about Iris's upcoming school schedule, or the household budget review that Patricia had mentioned the week before. She sat down, folded her hands in her lap, and looked at Raymond with the open, steady expression she always carried. Raymond did not look at her. He pushed the forensic report across the desk. "Would you like to explain this?" Celeste looked down. She read. Her expression moved, not with the guilt of someone caught, but with the particular confusion of someone looking at their own name on a document that makes no sense. "I don't understand," she said quietly. "The leak came from your tablet," Raymond said. "Your login, your credentials, 11:47 p.m. on Thursday night." "Raymond, I was asleep at 11:47. I haven't touched that tablet since Wednesday afternoon when I updated Iris's school calendar." "The report says otherwise." "Then the report is wrong." There was a pause, long and cold and full of the kind of tension that lives in the space between accusation and response. "Celeste," Raymond said slowly, "this merger was worth hundreds of millions. The file that was leaked was known to 6 people. You had access to my cloud drive. You had the login credentials. The timestamp is irrefutable." "I understand what the timestamp says," Celeste replied, and her voice was remarkable in that moment, not raised, not cracking, but carrying a weight that came from somewhere deep and dignified. "But I am telling you that I did not do this. I have given 3 years to this household, to your daughter. I would not do this." Raymond looked at her for a long moment. And then he looked away. "I want you out," he said, "tonight. It is a particular kind of wound, being disbelieved by someone who knows you. Not a stranger's doubt, which is bearable because it costs nothing. Not the suspicion of an enemy, which can be dismissed because it comes with no expectation of better. But the disbelief of someone who has sat across from you at the breakfast table, who has watched you soothe his child through nightmares, who has seen, with his own eyes, the kind of person you are, and still chooses the coldness of a document over the warmth of 3 years. That kind of wound doesn't announce itself. It settles. Celeste walked to her apartment and began to pack with the methodical calm of someone who cannot afford to fall apart yet. She folded her clothes. She wrapped her framed photographs in sweaters. She took down the small painting Iris had made for her on her birthday. A map of an imaginary country Iris had named Graceland because, she had said, it was where Grace lived in her heart, and held it for a long time before placing it carefully between 2 layers of clothing. She did not cry. Not yet. Upstairs, Iris had not moved from the top of the staircase. She had heard the words through the half-open office door. "I want you out tonight." She did not fully understand the accusation. She was 7. The words merger and forensic report and leaked file existed in a language she did not yet speak. But she understood the sound of something ending. She had heard it once before, on a Tuesday morning, when her mother had kissed her forehead and wheeled 2 suitcases down the front path. She knew the sound of a door closing on someone she loved. And she knew something else. Something she had seen 5 nights ago, on a Thursday evening, when she had woken up thirsty and padded downstairs in the dark to the kitchen. She had stopped at the kitchen doorway. Because someone was already there. Standing at the counter, holding the tablet, tapping something quietly. Not Celeste. Celeste's light had been off. Celeste's door had been closed. The person at the counter was wearing a silk robe, cream-colored, with a gold pattern at the hem. Iris knew that robe. She had seen it hanging on the back of the guest bathroom door on the mornings when Portia stayed over. Iris had stood very still in the kitchen doorway. And the person at the counter had not seen her. Iris went back to bed that night without saying anything. She was 7. She did not know the word evidence. She did not know she had witnessed something important. She had simply filed it away in that extraordinary, photographic little mind of hers, the same mind that drew maps of imaginary worlds and gone back to sleep. She had thought about telling her father the next morning. But her father had been on calls all day, and the day after, and the day after that. And children learn, very quickly, when the adults around them are unavailable. So she had stayed quiet. Until now. Until she was crouched at the top of the staircase, watching Celeste walk slowly down the hallway toward the front door, coat on, bag in hand, and the look on her face the same look her mother had on that Tuesday morning. The look of someone leaving somewhere they didn't want to leave. Raymond stood by the front door. He had not helped with the bags. He had not offered to call a car. He had stood there with his arms crossed and his face closed and his jaw set, a man who had decided and was not reopening the conversation. Celeste stopped in front of him. She looked at him, not with anger, not with tears, but with something that was somehow more devastating than either. She looked at him with disappointment. "I hope," she said quietly, "that one day you find out the truth, not for my sake, for yours, because the person who actually did this is still in your house, and that means Iris is still in the room with them." Raymond said nothing. Celeste turned to walk out. And then from the top of the staircase came a small, clear voice. "Daddy." Raymond looked up. Iris was standing at the top of the stairs, bare feet, stuffed rabbit, eyes wide and certain and more serious than any 7-year-old's eyes had any right to be. "Daddy," Celeste didn't do it. The room went completely still. Raymond stared at his daughter. Iris, go back too. It wasn't Celeste, it was Portia. 5 words this time, followed by 2 more. "I saw her." 7 words in total. 7 words that stopped the world. Raymond's voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "What did you say?" Iris came down the stairs slowly, 1 step at a time, her rabbit tucked under her arm. She stopped 3 steps from the bottom and looked at her father with the kind of steadiness that children sometimes possess when they have decided that the truth cannot wait any longer. I woke up because I was thirsty. I came downstairs. The kitchen light wasn't on, but the tablet screen was glowing. Miss Portia was standing at the counter and she was typing really fast. I thought maybe she was checking her emails, and I didn't want to bother her, so I went back upstairs. Pause. I didn't know it was bad. I didn't know what she was doing, but I remembered because she was wearing her cream robe with the gold on the bottom, the one that smells like rose water. She looked at Celeste. I'm sorry I didn't say before. I didn't know it mattered. There are moments in a person's life when the full weight of a mistake lands not gradually, but all at once. This was one of those moments for Raymond Holt. He stood in his own hallway, between the woman he had just accused and the daughter he had not thought to ask, and felt the ground shift beneath him in a way that had nothing to do with money or mergers or forensic reports. He had done it again. He had looked at evidence. He had listened to lawyers. He had made a decision without asking the one person in the building who was too small and too young and too overlooked to be considered a credible source. His 7-year-old daughter, who had been awake, who had seen everything, who had been waiting for someone to ask. Howard Webb received a phone call from Raymond at 10 minutes past 9 that evening. Pull the security footage from the kitchen, Thursday night, 11 p.m. to midnight, and get my forensic IT team back here, tonight. Raymond Watts. Just do it. The footage was retrieved within the hour. At 11:43 p.m., 4 minutes before the timestamp on the leaked file, the kitchen camera showed a figure entering through the side door, cream robe, gold hem, moving directly to the counter where the tablet sat charging. The figure worked quickly, efficiently, with the focused precision of someone who had planned exactly what they were doing and had very little time in which to do it. At 11:51 p.m., the figure replaced the tablet on its charging stand and left the way they had come. The figure's face was visible for exactly 3 seconds as they passed the under-cabinet light. Portia Sinclair. Howard Webb, to his credit, moved fast. Portia was contacted within the hour. She denied everything with the polished confidence of a woman who had not yet seen the footage. When she was informed, very calmly, that the kitchen camera had captured the entirety of her 11-minute visit, the composure cracked, not dramatically, but in the particular way of expensive china. A thin, sharp fracture running from corner to corner. The motive, when it surfaced, was the kind of thing that sounds almost too calculated to be real. Portia had, for the past 14 months, been quietly invested, through a complex web of shell companies, in the very rival firm that had used the Meridian file to restructure their offer. A firm that stood to profit enormously if Raymond's deal with Voss Digital collapsed. She had entered Raymond's life not by coincidence, but by design. 8 months of patience, 8 months of positioning, 8 months of learning the layout of a house, the location of a tablet, the length of time a nanny's light stayed on at night. She had not been seduced by Raymond. She had been studying him. And she had used the most trusted person in his household as her instrument, betting, correctly, that the evidence would point to Celeste and that Raymond, wounded and distrustful as he was, would not look further. She had been right about almost everything, except the 7-year-old at the top of the stairs. The legal proceedings moved quickly. Howard Webb's team filed a civil suit within the week. The forensic evidence, the kitchen footage, the digital trail from the temporary email account traced back to a device registered in Portia's name, the financial records linking her to the rival firm, constructed a case that was, in Webb's words, almost insurmountably clear. Portia's legal team advised her to settle. The settlement, when it was reached, was substantial. Beyond that, It is not the part of this story that matters most. Raymond went to find Celeste 3 days after the footage was retrieved. She was staying with a friend, a woman named Diane who had known Celeste for 15 years and had spent the first 24 hours of Celeste's arrival quietly furious on her behalf. Raymond sat in Diane's living room, which was warm and cluttered with books and houseplants, and held a cup of tea he did not drink and struggled, for perhaps the first time in his adult life, to find the precise words for what he needed to say. Celeste sat across from him. She did not make it easy. She did not make it hard either. She simply waited, with that same quiet steadiness she had always carried, and let him find his way there himself. "I failed you," Raymond said eventually. "Not in the way I failed by choosing the wrong person. I failed you in the way I failed by not choosing you, by not looking at 3 years of evidence that was sitting directly in front of me and deciding that it outweighed a single night's worth of data." Pause. "You told me the report was wrong. You told me clearly, and I chose to believe a document over a person I knew, a person I should have trusted." He looked at her. "I was afraid. That is not an excuse. It is simply the truth. I had been wrong before about who was trustworthy, and I had told myself I would never be caught like that again. And in trying to protect myself from being deceived, I did to you exactly what had been done to me. I drew a conclusion without the full picture, and I acted on it without giving you the fairness you deserved." Celeste was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Did you ask Iris if she was all right?" Raymond looked at her. "She watched you leave, Raymond. She watched you send away the one person in that house who made her feel safe, and she is 7 years old, and she has already watched one woman she loved walk out of your front door." Raymond closed his eyes briefly. "She is the reason the truth came out," Celeste continued. "Not the footage, not the lawyers. Iris, a 7-year-old child who stood at the top of the stairs and decided that the truth was more important than her fear of saying it. I know. She needs to know that mattered, that her voice mattered, that she won't be overlooked. I know that too." Another pause. "Will you come back?" Raymond asked. Celeste did not answer that day. She asked for 2 weeks. Raymond gave her the time without argument. He went home and sat with Iris in the kitchen and asked her, properly, carefully, in the way he should have been asking all along, how she was feeling. Iris thought about it seriously, the way she did everything. "I was scared when Celeste left," she said. "It felt like when Mummy left." "I know," Raymond said quietly. "I'm sorry." "You believed something bad about her," Iris said, not accusingly, just factually in that clear-eyed way of hers. "I did. Even though you knew her. Even though I knew her, I was wrong." Iris considered this for a moment. "You should tell her you're sorry properly," she said. "Not just sorry, the kind of sorry where you actually change." Raymond looked at his daughter, this small, extraordinary person who had somehow, in the wreckage of an imperfect home, grown into someone wiser than him. "When did you get so perceptive?" he murmured. Iris thought about it. "Celeste taught me," she said simply. "She said the most important thing you can do when you've hurt someone is to understand why you did it, not just what you did, the why." Raymond was silent for a long moment. "She's right," he said. "She usually is," said Iris. Celeste returned on a Tuesday morning. She did not make an announcement of it. She simply arrived as she always had at 7:45. She let herself in through the side entrance. She put the kettle on. Iris heard the sound of the kitchen and came running down the stairs still wearing her pajamas and slid across the kitchen floor in her socks and threw herself at Celeste with the full, unguarded force of a child who does not yet know how to pretend she doesn't care. Celeste caught her, held her, pressed her lips to the top of her head and closed her eyes and stayed there for a long moment while the kettle boiled and the morning light came through the kitchen window and something in the house that had been holding its breath quietly, carefully, began to breathe again. Raymond walked into the kitchen 20 minutes later. He looked at Celeste. She looked at him. There was no dramatic declaration, no sweeping cinematic resolution that tidied everything into a bow. Real trust is not rebuilt in a single conversation or a single morning. Raymond understood that now. He had not been wrong once, he had been wrong in a pattern, and patterns do not break with apologies alone. But they do begin to break. They begin to break with the slow, consistent work of showing up differently. And Raymond Holt, for the first time in a long time, was willing to do that work. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," said Celeste. And Iris, sitting at the kitchen counter with a bowl of cereal and her cartographer's sketchbook, looked up at both of them and smiled, privately, quietly, and went back to drawing the map of an imaginary country where the people who deserved to stay always did. Sometimes the hardest truth isn't what was said, but what was never believed. Some wounds don't disappear just because someone says sorry. Think about that for a moment. Raymond had 3 years of evidence that Celeste was trustworthy, 3 years of watching her love his daughter, 3 years of her showing up. And one night's worth of data was enough to override all of it. Here is the question I need you to sit with today. If you were Celeste, and the person who dismissed you after 3 years of loyalty finally came back and asked for forgiveness, would you return? Or would you decide that a person who could discard you that quickly is someone whose trust is no longer worth having, no matter how sorry they are? There is no wrong answer here. But I want to know yours. I'm reading every comment. If this story moved something inside you today, if you felt Celeste's silence as she packed her bags, if you held your breath when Iris spoke from the top of that staircase, if you believe, the way this channel believes, that the truth always finds its way home eventually, then you already belong here. Nanny Grace Channel exists for exactly this. Stories about the people who are doubted before they are believed, the ones who stay loyal when loyalty costs them everything, the ones whose dignity holds even when everything else falls apart. If that speaks to you, subscribe, not for us, for yourself. So the next time life feels heavy, another story will be waiting. And if you think what Raymond did tonight was painful to watch, wait. Wait until you see what he did when things went even further. The story where he didn't just dismiss the nanny, he had her arrested, in handcuffs, in front of his daughter, in their own home. That story is already waiting for you right now on this channel. Go watch it next. This is Nanny Grace, reminding you that the truth always finds its way home. Until next time, guard your heart. Not everyone deserves its secrets.